Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis. We're going to get, obviously, this is about everything football. We're going to get into some football today. So obviously, I don't know how many of my listeners are also basketball fans. If you've been listening to the basketball podcast, I've been doing season reviews for teams. And obviously, if you listen to this podcast, on Tuesdays when our show drops, me and Ethan have talked about at the end of our shows a division breakdown of teams. Now, it's not very in-depth. It's just an overall perspective on every team in the league, and we just talk about it for a segment. Well, now, after the first segment of this show, I'm going to do the same thing I've been doing with NBA, which is breaking out in every one individual team a segment with the NFL, and I'm going to break down teams today that, in my opinion, on their season, but also since free agency has initially gone through a week, we're also going to talk about some of the signings that have been made, some of the additions, draft coming up, things like that. So we're going to talk about all of that here on the podcast. I'm going to start with the NFC first. So you'll probably hear NFC teams for the next couple of weeks. There's 16 teams in each division. So yeah, about at least 3 shows of teams, maybe 4. We'll have to see, but yeah, so that's my plan moving forward. With that, to create, giving you guys content. Obviously, I think with right now, this should take me very close to the NFL draft, which I'll talk about with news in this first segment about them continuing, because there was questions if they would postpone it, but Roger Goodell sent a memo out to all the teams saying that they're going to keep it. So that's just my plans for the show for the next couple of weeks and for today's show. So let's get into it. Like I said, Roger Goodell sent a memo out to all the teams saying the NFL draft will go on as scheduled. There was questions, obviously, because of the coronavirus. A lot of people were thinking, are they going to push things back? Are they going to cancel things? And Roger Goodell went out today and just said, we're going to go ahead, stick with the NFL draft, the schedule, the date, the time, and we're going to do it. Because I understand. There was rumors that they might push it back to June. Obviously, that's going to be something I'm sure they don't want, because now you have rookies who now won't even know what team they're going to till June, which is 2 months before preseason, a month before training camp. You do that, it makes you kind of feel like basically no rookie can play opening day, because who's going to there may be positions like, okay, defensive end, we just need to rush the passer. Sure. But quarterbacks, they're literally, that means no quarterbacks can play. If you the Bengals are drafting Joe Burrow to start, but literally if he don't get drafted till June and you can't even playbook till June, are you really gonna throw him out there in September with only maybe 2.5? Because we don't even know, even when they get drafted, can they even work out with the team? So they may not actually do any work with the team till training camp, which might be, if they don't delay anything else. Let's say they delay training camp into August and they take away a preseason game. Are you really going to trust a guy who's only been in the league for that month, 2-3 months, to go out opening day and play for you? You might have to keep Andy Dalton and say, hey, we need you to kind of hold the fort for a couple of games till we feel like Joe Burrow's up to speed and we can put him out there. So honestly, keeping Andy Dalton might not be the worst, decision the Bengals can make if that's the case. So obviously, I understand why Roger Goodell's like, we're going to stick with it. They're going to do a studio production. It'll be interesting to see how they do this, but they're going to do a studio production show. And they're going to go with that. And, like I said, they just want to make sure they can get because I think Roger just wants, and the NFL wants that teams to have these players know who they're going to, know who they're signing with. So then they can go ahead and, even though they might not be able to work out necessarily in the facilities, they know which team they can get their hands on the playbook potentially. Maybe, work out, try to look at some tape, look at some film, study the playbook, and at least mentally try to get ahead of the curve, while obviously in terms of execution, they'll have to wait for it. Because obviously wait till June, that could really be not good. Because, think about this draft process. People were waiting for all this, doing all this to wait to see if they can get back to the NFL and see if they're going to get drafted, and they're having to wait an extra 2 months to see. I think that's a process that could change things. So obviously we'll have to see what happens when it comes to that. Obviously, I'm sure Roger Goodell in the NFL, like I said, some people were questioning if they would even start the league year on time. They did. I think the NFL, in terms of outside of workouts, is trying to keep everything else the same and not go too far up their schedule. You've even had people come out in college football saying we might have to push back the opening of the season because, again, since we don't know what's going to happen with this coronavirus situation, everybody's kind of in this state of, we can't just say, yeah, it's August, we'll be back to normal, this virus will pass over, we'll be fine. It feels like we gotta still kind of, we still kind of gotta like figure things out so we know what's the best direction with every sports league in the entire United States. But now we're going to get some other news. Cam Newton, obviously. Cam Newton, video service on Instagram, him, and on Twitter, of him listening to gospel music. So, he's about to burn up the league. Listening to gospel, working out, talking about they gave up on me. Obviously, Cam Newton is very motivated right now. Motivated, but may have to become a backup, which I think is the right decision right now in his career. It feels like no team's willing to really take a flyer on him. I think there's also this conversation I think teams have. If you potentially could draft a quarterback, I think teams think, do we want to bring in a guy who may or may not pan out for us and then still have to end up drafting a quarterback just another or 2 years later, which could potentially push back your franchise plan a year or 2 years later? Or go ahead, draft a guy that we think could be the future of the franchise and just see what happens with him. Because, there may be a guy in this draft that you really like. And then if you lose out because you sign Cam or you sign Jameis, you may not get another opportunity like you had to get a guy that you could have gotten. And so you don't want to take that chance, so you're just going to go ahead and go with the rookie. I think that's something that's really sketchy because I think NFL teams, they don't look at, next year's draft, they're going to have this, so we can go ahead and maybe pass on something this year. NFL draft, every NFL team takes every NFL draft like this may be the last NFL draft. So if we want a guy, we really, really, really want him, we gotta we gotta get him. Because if that's the case, you may have Trevor Lawrence come out next year, but you don't know what's going to happen with your team. That's why you're still going to draft Joe Burrow, Herbert, Jordan Love, because you can't sit here and just say, I'm going to wait on that. So I think that's one of the reasons why things like this happens. It creates a very interesting atmosphere and a very interesting space. I think Cam has all the ability in the world to help a team. Like Cam may be in that situation like Jameis, where he has to sign to a team and then just have to back up whoever the guy is. I think people don't talk about it, but I think there's a decent number of quarterbacks in the NFL that can play. Not all of them are stars, but can play. And so even if they're a top of the line backup, that's even feel. It's like back before, it's like you got a starter, but backups were not a lot of teams had a lot of good backups. Now it feels like a lot of teams have very capable backups now. Because a lot of backups now used to be former starters. So now you're having guys who didn't pan out as a starting quarterback, a franchise quarterback, but it doesn't mean he can't play. It just means that means he's not a guy who you can put your franchise on the back and he'll lead you to the promised land, but he's a guy who you can maybe have as your starter for a year or two and be able to play, like Ryan Tannehill. Like, I'm sure Tennessee knows they're going to have to draft a quarterback eventually, but Tannehill gives them time. And with the talent they have, they feel like we can maybe try to make a run with what we have. If you think about it, like backup roles are very much filled, because even if the backup to your team isn't the greatest or the biggest name, you think, well, we can upgrade him. Teams are comfortable. Backup quarterback, they feel like, I'm comfortable with the guy. I'm comfortable with what he's bringing to the table. I'm comfortable with what he brings to us. And I don't see the need to have to really make that change to the backup quarterback position. So that's why Cam might have some issues looking for a backup quarterback job. Because you just got to think, who really can you say he can go to and be a backup quarterback? Realistically. Where they'll be like, okay, well, he'll work for us. I think one place that he could potentially go is Buffalo. I know a lot of people don't talk about Buffalo, but I think he could potentially go there, back up Josh Allen. I mean, Josh Allen, he's not the exact same type of player as Cam, but they have similar. They're both 6'5" and big and run. So if Josh Allen came in, it's not like you're changing the offense dramatically for Cam. They kind of do the same things. It's just, this is maybe one guy, maybe he's more in the pocket more than the other. So, all those types of things happen. So, we'll have to see what happens with Cam Newton in his future moving forward, but we'll give you more updates when it comes. But coming up next, we're going to get to my season reviews, and we're going to start with everybody's favorite team, America's team, the Dallas Cowboys, right here on the podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about just some news and notes around the league, what my plans are for the future of the show going forward for the next couple of weeks. But we also discussed news. Obviously, the NFL draft will remain, on the same date, same time. There was some debate if they would change it, but they're not. They're going to go ahead and keep it on the same date. They're going to continue to do what the plan was all along, and they're going to do what they got to do to be successful. So obviously, there you go right there. They feel like this is the best move. They don't want to delay these rookies getting into their teams any sooner than they have to, and that's what they're going to go. And I'll also talk about Cam Newton, his future, with the dilemma that he's going through right now with quarterbacks, since everybody kind of has their starters, and then some are waiting to draft their starters. So, and even the backup positions aren't as open as it has been in the past. So it might be a little bit difficult for Cam, but I did give one team as a suggestion of maybe where he should potentially look into and who should potentially look into Cam. So there was my thoughts and everything on that. But now we're going to get to my season reviews. And the first team we're going to break it down them Cowboys. Them Dallas Cowboys. America team. Yes, the star, Jerry World, all that. But before we break it down, I do have some report about Dak Prescott's contract. Dak is reportedly said that whatever deal they do get done, because it sounds like what it means to me is that they're about to go ahead and just say, you know what, screw it, we're going to get you the money. He's about to be potentially the highest paid quarterback in the league. So if we hear any news like Dak Prescott signing a new deal, it could be because he is the highest paid quarterback now in NFL. And if he does also do that short-term deal, he might become the highest paid again in 4 years. We'll have to see, though. So there's that update on Dak Prescott. But now to the season review. So the Dallas Cowboys obviously started the season 3-0, but they beat what a lot of people considered cupcakes. A lot of teams that weren't that talented, teams they should have beaten. Obviously, this Dallas team was considered one of the most talented Dallas teams in years. And they started off 3-0, looked like they were great, looked like everything was going to work out. I think Philadelphia started off 1-2. So, they had a good start to the season. They were in the driver's seat. And then they started playing more competition. They lost to Teddy Bridgewater and the Saints. They lost to the Patriots in a game that you could look at that game, they could have won that. They lost to, the Jets unspeakably, even though I was Sam Darnold returning to the lineup. They lost to Minnesota. And basically, when it got after that first part of the season, when they had a tougher schedule, the Dallas Cowboys just did not come up and they didn't play well. And then they got to the end of the season. They still had the chance to win the division. 8-7. No, not 8-7. They were 7-7. Eagles came into that game, I believe, 6-7 or 6-8. I believe they came into that game. One of those two. I can't honestly remember. Maybe they might have been 7-7 too. But basically, they had a chance to win a division. They had the game against Philadelphia in Philadelphia. Obviously, if you know about the Eagles season, third string wide receivers, second, third string running backs, offensive line injuries, secondary a mess, and Dallas was healthy. Amari, Michael Gallup, Zeke, everybody was there. And like Dallas Cowboys do in most seasons, big games, they failed. They lost, and then they proceeded to not make the playoffs or win the division when they really were in the driver's seat the whole year. They finished 8-8, and with a team with the talent that Dallas has had, finishing 8-8 was just very lackluster. It was very embarrassing. Obviously, they went ahead and fired Jason Garrett because obviously that's been a discussion or a point of topic for years. Was Jason Garrett the right coach for the situation? Was he holding back the potential of the team? Was he a good enough coach to get the most out of his players? All of that. So, obviously this was a very big, dispute, debate, everything like that. And the season just came out as a big disappointment. Obviously, going into the offseason, they made changes. They fired Jason Garrett, brought in Mike McCarthy, former Green Bay head coach, won a Super Bowl in Green Bay. Some people were kind of iffy on the move at first. Could they have gotten a better coach? Could they have gotten a young and up-and-coming coach? But they feel like, it's just... I think it's just one of those things where they feel like with Kellen Moore and new guys regulated that the Dallas team, if they can get the right coach in there, they can maximize on their talent and potentially be a good team that could potentially make the playoffs and maybe make a run to the playoffs. Now, obviously, if you've seen what has happened in free agency, they've lost some guys. They've lost Byron Jones. They've lost Jeff Heath. They've lost Robert Quinn. They lost Travis Frederick to an unexpected retirement. They've lost a lot of defensive players. They lost Jason Witten. They lost Randall Cobb. They lost a lot of guys. And they really haven't made too many additions because they've had to pay their players. They re-signed Sean Lee. They gave Amari Cooper a $100 million contract. Looks like they're about to potentially sign Dak to a contract. They gave Zeke money last offseason. So I'm sure they're pretty much tied against the cap, I'm sure. And with this Dak deal, it might tie even more against the cap. And so they feel like it's going to be difficult for them to really upgrade this team. So Dallas is in a situation where they really have to hit on their draft picks. Because sometimes with these teams that have talent, but they have a tight cap, you can't sometimes resign your talent. So it's going to be very important that you hit on draft picks because that's cheap talent you can bring in. It might be better or good enough to replace what you had because you don't know where rookie's going to be. Obviously, if you look at the Cowboys, you look at needs, I'm sure they'll probably draft a corner. I think that's their biggest need right now because before Byron Jones left, a lot of people feel like they didn't really even have a good corner outside of him. And they let him walk in free agency, obviously signed a big deal with the Miami Dolphins. And now, they don't really have any corners that strike fear in you or make you feel like, oh, snap, like they can shut down one of our receivers. You look at the Dallas Cowboys secondary and think that's a picking. You can have a field day with that secondary. So I'm sure a secondary will be something they draft this draft because you need some secondary guys. They might draft an offensive lineman, a center to replace Travis Frederick. They might draft a defensive end. I feel like defensively, that's where the draft's going to go. Offensively, they're still pretty much good. I mean, you still got Zeke, got Dak, you got Amari, you got Michael Gallup. You never know what's going to happen, Blake Jarwin looks like he'll be the number one guy. If Tavon Austin, they bring him back, or if they bring in another guy, they could replace that. We'll have to see what they do with the center position, as I said. But offensively, they still should be fine. It's the defensive side of the ball where there's going to be a lot of questions. Their strength right now is their linebacking core with Van Der Esch and Sean Lee and Jalen Smith. But secondary is a very big question, and we'll have to see how they, respond to losing Robert Quinn and free agency. So the Dallas Cowboys, they are in a position where there's a lot of pressure. Jerry expects to be in the playoffs, expects to win. They're in a division where right now your biggest challenge is Philadelphia, who a lot of people feel like is the best run team in your division and in the NFC potentially. And that's why they've always been able to get the leg up over the Dallas Cowboys a lot of years. And why, even when it looks like the Eagles are down, they'll still always be in it, where if Dallas gets down, it feels like they're out of it. Obviously, it'll probably come down to those two teams again this year, and if Dallas wants to, quiet some of the haters and quiet some of the doubters, they're going to have to beat Philly, and they're going to have to win the games they should win, and win some of the games they may not be expected to win. Because that's what's going to make you a great team in this league, and that's going to make everybody then believe in the Dallas Cowboys once again as America's team and as one of the best teams in the NFL. But coming up next, the team we just mentioned with the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles, and their season free agency review will be right here on the podcast. Stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, I talked about America's team, the Dallas Cowboys, what their season has been, what the review of the season is, what they look like going into the offseason with some of the signings and adjustments they made, coaching changes. I discussed all of that. I discussed my thoughts on just basically what the team is constructed like and how the pressure of being America's team can affect them because, you're expected to win. Jerry's expecting to win. He's giving out these big contracts to Zeke, Amari, and Dak. Though that is considered the big three on offense. And if they do not come up and produce this year, Jerry's going to be looking like, I really messed up my franchise giving these big deals to these players that didn't even get me what I expected to get out of them. And obviously that might hurt other players because now he may be more worried to pay players if he's not getting the production that he wants. Now we're going to go to their arch rival within the division, the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, Philadelphia, we know the season they had a lot of expectations coming into this season. Carson Wentz back from injury. Questions around him, can he stay healthy the whole year? Which was answered. He stayed healthy the entire regular season. But when he was healthy, everybody else started going down around him. Alshon Jeffrey was dealing with injuries and in and out of the lineup all year. Deshaun Jackson was basically taken out in week 2, out for the year. Nelson Aguilar had a case of the dropsies and was hurt. You were literally going with guys with Huwega Whiteside and other guys. Greg Ward Jr., who came off the practice squad. Running backs, Jordan Howard was in and out of the lineup most of the year. Miles Sanders, who they drafted, and Byron Scott, who came off the practice squad, had to step up. Jason Peters was in and out of the lineup with injuries. Other offensive linemen were hurt. Zach Ertz at the end of the year got hurt. It was just injuries left and right on the Philadelphia offense. Their offense was ravaged. They were playing third stringers and practice squad players. And they still finished the season 9-7 and went to the playoffs. because Carson Wentz was able to will them to the playoffs. He was able to overcome the limitations of his team and get them over the top, which I feel like solidified Carson Wentz as a franchise quarterback, no doubt about it. But obviously, if you watch the wild card game, we know what happened. He got injured in the first quarter with a concussion and missed the playoff game. Some people wonder, would it have changed? What would have happened in the game? It was only 9-17 was the final score. Could have a healthy Carson Wentz gotten them above the Seattle Seahawks? We don't know. Some people feel like no, but some people might feel like yes. But, obviously, also with the Eagles, it's been very much touted that their secondary has been an issue. They have not really had good secondary play for a while. The guy they brought in, Robert Darby, hasn't been what they expected. Sidney Jones has been under a lot of scrutiny. A lot of people in Philadelphia do not like Sidney Jones. They feel like he's a bust and he's failed at corner. They had their leader, Malcolm Jenkins, leave in free agency to the New Orleans Saints, where they're going to put Jalen Mills in that role. And, their secondary has always been their biggest weakness on defense. Defensive line was their strength because they've always been very good on both lines of scrimmage, as they've both built both of those sides of the ball. Obviously, on the defensive side, Fletcher Cox leading that charge, Barnett. They had a lot of guys who are aggressive and go after you every play. So, this offseason, they really haven't made too many moves. They signed Nickell Coleman, one of the top nickel corners in the NFL. So they equipped their secondary. They added a very good nickel. Then they made a trade for Darius Big Play Slay. And now they have a number 1 guy. Now they have the number 2 position open. Now, obviously, they can maybe now play with that position. You could put Sidney Jones. You could put Devontae Maddox. You could put different players in that role. I think they feel like they've made 2 upgrades to their secondary, so they feel like a secondary should not be as much of an issue. And even Terry Roseman came out saying that for Sidney Jones, at least, it's a make-or-break season for him. So they're basically saying, listen, we want him to be the number 2 guy, but if he ends up not being number 2 guy or he ends up struggling, he's probably coming up on his contract. He's probably about to be let go. So it's going to be big for him to come out there and produce this year. Really, their biggest issue now is wide receiver. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with Deshaun Jackson. Alshon Jeffrey, injuries are a concern. That's a big elephant in the room. Greg Ward's a good player. I don't know if they're trying to really keep him in as the main receiver. Obviously, you still have young receivers, like I said, Awake, Whiteside, and everything. But they are looking to add speed in the draft, because that's one thing. Outside of Deshaun Jackson, they really have no speed at the wide receiver position. Everybody's a possession receiver. So they can't really stretch the field. That's why they brought in Deshaun Jackson, to stretch the field. So they're probably, now that they've made adjustments to the secondary, are probably going to go more heavy on the receivers in the draft. Obviously, this draft has a lot of talented guys. So they might draft 1 or 2 or 3 speedsters, in the draft to give Carson Wentz a deep threat. Because one thing they want is they want the ability to have a young wide receiver mesh with Carson Wentz. Because, certain quarterbacks just have certain or better chemistry with certain players. Certain quarterbacks have better chemistry with, certain wide receivers. You've seen it in Tampa with Jameis Winston. He has better chemistry with Chris Godwin than he does with Mike Evans. Even though people consider Mike Evans the best receiver out of the 2. But he don't get the targets and the receptions and the yards like Chris Godwin gets, because that's not his favorite target. That's not the guy he has chemistry with. And I'm sure they're thinking Carson Wentz has never had a receiver outside of, because if you think about it, even in Philadelphia, when Nick Foles was there, the best chemistry was with Alshon Jeffrey. Wentz had decent chemistry with Alshon Jeffrey, but it wasn't the same as what he had with Nick Foles. Him and Deshaun Jackson, like at the beginning of the season, they might have chemistry. Then when he went down. They tried to bring in Jordan Matthews at the end of last year because that was somebody he had good chemistry with. But obviously, coming in like late in the season, that kind of doesn't always work out. The Philadelphia Eagles have one of the best organizations in the NFL. They're very well run all the way from the top. Good coaching, quarterback, because that's what you need, good coaching, good quarterback. And basically, that's why they've been able to overcome. They have the structure to overcome adversity. That's why we've always kind of been down on the Cowboys, where we feel like they've never had the structure to overcome diversity. They need everything to go well for them, or else they'll falter. Philadelphia has always had something go wrong, and they've always succeeded. Think about it. 2 years in a row, your quarterback goes down before the playoffs. Twice. But still get into the playoffs. The first time he went down, they won the Super Bowl with the backup. They have always had very well-constructed teams. It's just, like I said, quarterback was hurt, and then this time when the quarterback's hurt, everybody else goes down. So if Philadelphia could just get that good string of luck and have the quarterback and weapons healthy, Philadelphia, I've said it, looks like one of the most complete teams on paper. They would be the favorite, in my opinion, to win in the NFC East. Because really, outside of the Cowboys, we don't know what Dallas is going to look. We don't know what Dallas. We don't know who Washington's going to look like. We don't know how New York's going to look. We don't know if they're going to be good teams or not. We expect them to be either average or very mediocre or bad. So that means you would expect that they're on top of their game, that those are a better chance for sweeps, and that's 4 wins. And if they could split with Dallas, they're 5-1 in the division. Usually, you get 10 wins. That usually is what we consider the magical number to at least get you into the playoffs. They just got to win 5 more games out of the 11 they have left. They'll get into the playoffs. So Philadelphia is definitely in a great place right now. Like I said, they know what they have to do. They know what their needs are. They know the adjustments they have to make. So they're going to probably go into the draft again. They don't have too much cap room. So they're going to have to hit on their draft picks. They're going to have to rely on these young players to come in and produce. Obviously, offensively, they're going to expect the receivers they draft to come in and produce. And also for depth, they might want to have some young players at other positions. So maybe if they have an injury on a certain level, they have a young guy they can bring in there and not paying too much to, and maybe prove to be a starter at the end of it all. So definitely a lot of things going well for the Philadelphia Eagles. Great coach, great organization, great quarterback, got a franchise guy. There's a lot going for you. There is a lot going for you. Listen, Peterson's going to get that team right. Doug will make sure these guys are ready when it comes to day one. So, like I said, everything looks good moving forward with the Philadelphia Eagles. They just have to they know what they have to fix. They get it fixed. They get well coached, and they'll be right back in the picture in the playoffs next season. But coming up next, we're going to go to another NFC East team. The New York Giants season in review and free agency right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the Philadelphia Eagles season in review. I broke down, obviously, the season they had, the injuries that they had. They've just never really been able to get a string of luck outside of the Super Bowl year. The injuries, been rough. It's been rough. But they're also one of the best structured teams in the league, best coach teams in the league. So if they can get the right things to happen for them, they have all the potential in the world to end up being one of the best teams in the NFL. Like, they legitimately have the potential, if they adjust what they need to adjust, to end up becoming one of the best teams in the league. And if that actually ends up happening, that's why I would think they would be able to overcome the Dallas Cowboys again for another year, especially when it looks like Dallas has lost a lot of people and the Philadelphia is added. But Now we're going to get into it where basically we're going to get into the third NFC East team, the New York Football Giants. The New York Giants, obviously, we know what happened with their old Super Bowls with Eli. Obviously, they moved off Eli Manning. They drafted the quarterback of the future last year in Daniel Jones. He came in during the season, had a great debut performance against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And ever since that game, he kind of had an up and down season a little bit where, he had some games where he struggled, was hurt for a couple, but also at the same time had games where he played superb and showed potential of why he's the future quarterback of the NFL. Obviously, the Giants have a lot of, I feel like the Giants are the team in the division that have the most potential to be a surprise team because they have talent. You feel like you found your quarterback. You feel like you got Saquon Barkley, one of the best running backs in the game. Even though he was hurt last year, you found a running back. The thing about the Giants offensively is they don't have a true number one receiver, but they have a lot of good receivers. They have, Darius Slayton. He was a good receiver, rookie receiver from LSU last year. Golden Tate's one of the best slot receivers in the league. Sterling Shepard's a good receiver. He's a good number 2. I mean, I feel like now the receiving core, like I said, it's not bad, but they don't have a number 1. So if they end up getting a number 1, I think that really could open up their offense. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants, even though they probably won't do it with their first pick, I wouldn't be surprised if they draft a receiver, a big play receiver, and they're going to go with a very young receiving core of Golden Tate being the veteran of that core. Obviously, offensive line-wise, they have some adjustments they need to make. Their offensive line's been an issue. It was better last year, but still some changes. Defensively, they weren't bad last year. They made some adjustments defensively. They found some guys that they liked. There's still adjustments they have to make defensively, too. This team needs some work on both sides of the ball. They have some work they have on both sides of the ball they need to do. But they also have potential. They have excitement. They have expectations. They have what you say. Well, I guess you can just stick with the word excitement. Yeah, you have excitement because you have guys who you can build around to then create a good team. It's just about how else do you finish or how else do you build the rest of the team out. Obviously, they got a new head coach. Surprising hire in Joe Judge. A lot of people don't know what to really expect from him because he was never a guy that was on anybody's list of potential head coaches. And all we know, he was a special team coach in New England. And we don't really know what that's supposed to mean for the Giants. Is he going to be what the Giants need to be a good team? The Giants really, obviously the Giants have always been the team that's battling the other team in their state, the Jets, even though they're not in the same conference, but they have 2 teams. They're battling that team. Obviously it feels like every time they play each other, it's a big deal because it's them. But they have potential. Like I said, they have plenty of potential. And I think that it's just a matter of putting it all together. They got to put it all together. That's going to be the key here with them. So, we'll have to see. Now, obviously, the Giants have made some moves in free agency. Now, all these teams I've also talked about so far, not a lot of them have made a lot of dramatic moves. So there's a lot of guys who still haven't signed, or they might sign guys later on to add depth. Because I think sometimes teams want to see what they look like after the draft. Obviously, they're not trying to spend too much money. And I'm sure there's some guys they want to lock up too. So we'll have to see what they do from that perspective. But they've added some guys. James Bradbury from the Panthers, top corner now. They have a number 1 corner. Obviously, they lost Janoris Jenkins. They signed him. They signed Blake Martinez, which I think was a great addition. Blake Martinez was a tackling machine in Green Bay. And obviously, you know, they were able to get Leonard Williams back. And, you know, they've lost some guys, but they signed Cameron Fleming to replace Mike Remmers. Obviously, David Mayo and Blake Martinez to replace Alec Ogletree. James Bearberry to help the secondary. Still got Leonard Williams. They had a lot of money, you know, in free agency to go with. And, you know, it'll be important to see what happens. You know, Kyle Fackwell, he's going to be a guy who's going to be interesting. He's one of their secret free agent signs. I know a lot of people don't know about. He had a down year last year, but had 10.5 sacks in 2018. He's a good edge rusher. Hit with Marcus Golden. That's going to be a bookend duo for the New York Giants for years to come that can get after the passer. And honestly, most of their investment has been on defense, and it should get better. But they still have, you know, help they need to get with edge rusher and offensive line help. So we'll see. Like I said, teams make signings and they make adjustments, knowing the draft is still in mind, knowing, okay, we don't have to just dump all our money in this position because we ain't got nothing else we have to do after this. I'm sure they want to, you know, I think it's a debate where I know they want to kind of get younger at those spots. So if they can get younger at those spots, but also be very talented at those spots, they'll feel like they'll make improvements. Obviously, I think offensive line is the biggest deal because they need to protect Daniel Jones. He is the future of the franchise. He is the investment. He is the man who has been selected to replace Eli Manning for the future. He's the guy who they project to come in here and lead them to the promised land. And, you know, when you have a young quarterback, you don't want to put him in a situation which could jeopardize him. You want to make sure that at all times he's at the top of his game and you give him every chance to succeed. Because some teams, you've seen quarterbacks where they'll be put into a position where it just feels like they weren't given every chance to succeed. Some people like to say some quarterbacks' careers were ruined because they were just drafted to the wrong team. And everybody feels like the Giants and Daniel Jones was the perfect fit. And you saw flashes of what they could be last year. Now, in his first full season as a starter next year, it's going to be interesting to see what happens and see what he actually ends up turning into, the improvements he makes, and how the offense looks around him. Obviously, it's going to be important that Saquon Barkley stays healthy because, you know, he's a playmaker. This Saquon can bust it open in the open field out of the pass game, or it can run through a hole and bust it open. So the Giants, like I said, they have potential. There's excitement. There is a potential, like, again, they could be a very much improved team and during the 2020-2021 season, and potentially might be able to give maybe the Giants or the Eagles a run for their money coming out of the NFC East this year when it comes to just, you know, maybe potentially making the playoffs or just adding that loss they weren't expecting on their record. But coming up next, we're going to switch over from the NFC East teams, and we're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers, their season and free agency review, what the Green Bay Packers have done this offseason. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Well, as I said, we talked about the New York Giants, New York Football Giants. talk about their season in review and free agency moves they've made so far. Giants are a team with a lot of potential to be a wild card team next year in terms of really legitimately being a surprise team in the NFL. They have talent. They have a guy, a franchise quarterback going into his second year. If he continues to progress forward, why wouldn't the Giants, you would expect to have a better team? They've made adjustments. They've made improvements to the defense. They still have some draft picks to make to improve the team, and they have all the potential in the world to really be a surprise team next year in the NFL. It'll really show us if the hiring of Joe Judge was a good addition and a good hire for David Gettleman and the entire New York Giants front office. But, last 3 segments I've talked about the NFC East. Now I'm switching over to the NFC North. We're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, the Green Bay Packers made it to the NFC Championship game this past year. They were blown out by the 49ers, blown out twice by the 49ers the same season. A lot of people call the Green Bay Packers the most fraudulent 13-3 team they've ever seen. They win 13. You go 13-3, you think, wow, this is a pretty impressive team. This team is very well put together. But a lot of people felt like that the Green Bay Packers weren't as good as 13-3. And some people think if the Seattle Seahawks never lost their running backs, they would have never made it to the not the SEC championship game. I don't know why I'm saying SEC. They would have never made it to the NFC championship game. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers didn't look like what we expected him to look like last year, being the normal Aaron Rodgers. He had a good year, but not in terms of what we used to see from Aaron Rodgers. They did find a running game for the first time. Aaron Jones broke out last year and led the league in touchdowns. He's an elite running back in this game now. And having that running game is essential because it does take pressure off Aaron Rodgers and it can open up the play action game. One of the big issues that the Packers have had for years has been wide receiver. They really have never had a true wide receiver. The best wide receiver is Davante Adams. Davante Adams is a top receiver in this game. But he's more of a possession, good route running. He's like a better Emmanuel Sanders. That's what he is. He's a better Emmanuel Sanders. And that's fantastic, but they don't have a deep play receiver. They have a lot of young guys who just have never meshed with Aaron to that point where he has that connection. Because remember, when Aaron came into the job, he had Donald Driver, Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson. A lot of talent. They let go of Jimmy Graham this offseason. That didn't work out. They really, defensively, they were good, but they weren't great. And it was shown in a couple of games, if you were a physical football team, you could overmatch them. They have two bookends that can get after the passers, so they can get after you. But outside of that, if you pound these Packers, you could easily pound them into submission. 49ers did it twice. When they lost to the Chargers, it showed. The Packers were looked at as a finesse football team. And so, they've lost some guys. They've lost some guys this offseason. So, they have made some signings. Not too many, though. They signed Christian Kirksey from the Browns, linebacker. By the linebacking core. They lost Blake Martinez, so it makes sense. They lost, obviously, a tackle. They brought in Rick Wagner to replace him. They brought in Mercedes Lewis, a tight end, to help out in the tight end position to replace Jimmy Graham. And they just brought in Devin Funchess, who hasn't had the greatest start to his career, but is a very tall receiver, good red zone target. So, obviously, they kind of have the same situation the Philadelphia Eagles have. They need speed at wide receiver. Luckily, they have a lot of wide receivers in this draft, so they should be able to find a guy that should help them win and help them make plays. I think you need to be able to, because the thing about play action is this: you do play action to take deep shots. The Packers could run the ball for Aaron Jones, but had no deep threat. So really, it kind of, as a defense, I feel like, yeah, Aaron Jones might have been running on you, but you could still kind of stack the box, because who outside of Davante Adams could really beat you? And Davante Adams wasn't a guy who was going to really go on this go route, and Aaron Rodgers was going to throw it deep. So you kind of could still play tighter to the line of scrimmage because you knew what the offense was. Obviously, if they could get a deep threat, that will open up this Green Bay offense, and now will make them a very dangerous offense. And then also, there were times last year the Packers played down the competition. They didn't play as well as you would expect the Green Bay Packers to have played against certain teams. Obviously, one of the biggest games we remember is the last game of the season against Detroit, where they almost lost that game and almost ended up being a 3 seed instead of being a 2 seed. So, obviously, that was a big deal. So the jury's still out on Matt LaFleur. Is he a good coach? Is he really that good? Obviously, first season 13-3, NFC Championship game, you can't complain with that. You can't be mad at that, but there are some questions. And, like I said, the Packers have lost talent. And the Green Bay, their history, they've never been a free agency team. They've never been a team that signs a lot of guys. They usually just draft, which has somewhat been their downfall, especially at receiver, because they're not really hitting on receivers. Even though they've drafted receivers, they're not out here drafting first-round receivers. They're drafting third, fourth-round receivers, and then saying, well, we got Aaron Rodgers. He can make them great. Not realizing that's not always the case. If they still can't get open, they still can't make plays, it doesn't matter if you have Aaron Rodgers. Devontae Adams would be an elite slot receiver in this game. And I think if they can find a number one, they can put him back in the slot, and he can really kill defenses. Even though he can kill them at the number one position. But like I said, you don't really want your number one receiver always doing, post and, comebacks and cross the field. That's really what he did. That's really what his game was. So, and like I said, all the guys they signed to replace the guys that they lost were they're good quality players, but not any player that's just like, wow, this is going to change their fortune. They basically signed guys to stabilize some of the players that they've lost in the positions. So, Green Bay has a lot of potential to be good again next year. They're in a division where you don't know what the Bears are going to be. You don't feel like the Bears are going to be that great with Mitchell Trubisky or potentially even Nick Foles. Detroit, we have no idea what's happening there. Detroit is just a mess. And the only team that really can compete with you is Minnesota. But they've kind of had Minnesota's number the last couple of years. Even though Minnesota's one of the better teams, when it comes to head-to-head matchup, Green Bay has won 3 out of the last 4 of those matchups. So they've pretty much been able to own Minnesota the last 2 years, especially in both games this past season. So in a division, they're not in a division that's terribly tough as long as they handle business on their end. So I'm sure going into the draft, receiver will be a big need. I'm sure they'll look at maybe getting younger at offensive line, maybe drafting a pass rusher. I could see that being a change they make. Maybe a linebacker, because a lot of guys they signed were like the 1-2 year deals. So I don't feel like these are guys they expect to have long term. So that's where they may use this as they can stabilize the position. We can draft for that position. And then when it's time, we have younger players who can now step into the position, and we'll continue like always, which keeps costs low, but also I feel like they can maintain enough talent to still compete. So, Matt LaFleur is going to have to see, can he repeat his same success from this past year? Obviously, 13-3 in the second seed is very big expectations for you the next year. That should put you in Super Bowl contention every year. It shouldn't make you be looked at as a Super Bowl team, but there is a lot of jury out on the Green Bay Packers as a team, and even with that record and the success they have, a lot of people wonder, are they really a championship contender? Or are they just frauds? So, a lot of questions are going to have to be answered this year for the Green Bay Packers. I think everybody's going to know it kind of leads on the arm of Aaron Rodgers and his play. But if you can improve what you have around Aaron Rodgers, it's definitely very possible for the Green Bay Packers to get back where they used to be and be a consistent quality team for years to come. Which obviously you don't want to waste Aaron Rodgers' last years because you don't know how much longer he's going to play. So this would probably be the time for you to really make sure you put what you need to put around him so they can be successful going into the future. But coming up next, we're going to talk about my team, my favorite team. Obviously, can get more knowledge than most teams around the league, but the Atlanta Falcons, season in review and free agency right here on the podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the Green Bay Packers season review and free agency. Green Bay obviously is a team that people feel like was a fraud as a 13-3 team. Finesse team, destroyed by the 49ers twice. And really it just did not look impressive in a lot of games last year, even though they went 13-3. They don't view them as very serious Super Bowl contenders either. And obviously they've lost some key players. They've signed some guys, but more just to stabilize those positions than improve. And Matt LaFleur is really going to have to show people this year that he really is as good as he says he is. And Aaron Rodgers is going to have one of his best seasons. And they're going to have to upgrade some positions. Obviously the draft's still available, so they can still upgrade some positions on their team. And we'll have to see what ends up coming out of the Green Bay Packers this coming season, as they have a lot of people to prove wrong. So if you're a Green Bay fan, you may feel this way too. You may feel iffy about the team too, but we'll have to see what answers that they come up with this offseason and how they play when the season starts. But now we're going to get into the Atlanta Falcons, their season review and free agency. So the Atlanta Falcons, obviously, we all know what happened in 2016 Super Bowl. Obviously, ever since then, the Falcons have gone downhill. Next year, 10-6, made the playoffs, lost in the first round to the Philadelphia Eagles, the eventual Super Bowl champions. The next year, 7-9, started the season 4-4, finished 7-9. Last season started the season even worse, but finished the season again 7-9, and Dan Quinn still has a job. That's obviously where we're going to start first, because obviously a lot of people, especially in Atlanta, I've seen are not very fond of Dan Quinn. They feel like Dan Quinn makes a lot of bad decisions. They feel like a lot of people are not fans of Thomas Dimitroff either. They feel like he has cost them with certain contracts that they've signed to guys and how things haven't worked out. Right now, they're in a position where Arthur Blank has given them another chance with the talent that they've seen to win. But I definitely feel like this year is like, if we start off 1-4, 1-5, he's gone. Cause you can't keep doing this. We start off bad and then we finish good and keep retaining him. There has to be either we start off good, we finish good. And if we start off good and finish bad, then he's fired. So Dan Quinn's under a lot of pressure this year. He knows if he does not come out the gate playing well, he's done. He's a goner. And he has to come out and do better. The coaching has been very inconsistent on the Atlanta Falcons. One year it's, offensive coordinator ain't making the right plays. Offensive line's an issue. Defense can't defend nobody. And it just seems like every year something's not going right. Obviously this year Dan Quinn took over defense. Everybody thought, defense is going to be better. Offense is going to be better. Defense was putrid. Then they made the switch to Raheem Morris. Now they want to play good. And everybody's just like inconsistent coaching. If they could get consistent coaching, and obviously 2 years ago they had injuries, which is why they had that first season, but this past season they just didn't play well. Obviously, if you looked at the strengths of this team, I mean, they have Matt Ryan, who's been there, manning the ship. You know, Matt Ryan, I always say, people don't realize this about Matt Ryan, but have you noticed with every new coordinator, his first year of every new coordinator is a very bad year for him. Shanahan had his most picks in a season, next year MVP. Steve Sarkisian had one of his less productive seasons. The next year, under Steve, wasn't bad. I believe he had 35 touchdowns and 7 interceptions the second year of Steve Sarkisian. That was literally what he put up his MVP season. Dirk Cutter had raised his number of interceptions a little bit this year. Didn't play the greatest. Played well, but didn't play the greatest. So if we're going with that trend, Matt Ryan should have a much better second year. Obviously, this is a guy he's familiar with because he was one of his first offensive coordinators after, I think, Mike Mularkey left when he was first there with Mike Smith. But Obviously, some people are not even happy about Kirk Cutter staying because they feel like we should get a more offensive mind. But Dan Quinn has always tried to make sure that they can keep the offense that has given them success in place, and just bring an offensive coordinator who can bring in different concepts from his playbook and his mindset to maybe tweak the offense, but not have to make Matt Ryan and the entire offense learn a new offense. But yeah, I mean, really, there's a lot of potential there. Obviously, this offseason, outside of those coaching changes, let go of Devontae Freeman, brought in Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, former Georgia Bulldog. They feel like they're going to get the better Todd Gurley than what they've gotten the last previous seasons. They still have 3 running backs behind him. Quandre Allison played some good football last year. Good goal line back. Guy they drafted. Ito Smith got injured last year. He's played well in stretches. And Brian Hill, he's played well too. They kind of have they have a 4 running back community right now. There is no solid workhorse on the Atlanta Falcons. They are going to share carries. Wide receiving core is obviously their strength because Julio, one of the best receivers in the game. Calvin Ridley has emerged as one of the best receivers who could potentially be a number 1 receiver himself one day in this league. And they have some young guys behind those receivers that potentially could, break out, like Russell Gage Jr. is a guy who really has made some plays. I saw Matt Ryan go to him a few. They lost Austin Hooper, which was a big loss, but they brought in Hayden Hurst from the Baltimore Ravens, first-round pick. They are expecting him to come in and be productive. May not be Austin Hooper productive, but still can be productive. Ryan has a history of loving using his tight ends. So he'll definitely get chances in this offense to make plays. Offensive line-wise, that was always an issue. I feel like the offensive line has eroded a little bit, which I feel like most teams face when you have good offensive lines. Your offensive line can erode because it's very difficult to maintain the same level of play on the offensive line with always battling in the trenches every year. You got Jake Matthews. He's still good. He never became that star left tackle, but he was a good left tackle. Ryan Schrader, he was decent. Obviously, he was replaced. They've had to make some adjustments at right tackle. Obviously, that's why they ended up drafting who they drafted with Chris Lindstrom and McGarry from Michigan, as they expect those 2 to really play well. Obviously, McGarry was hurt. Played well, had some struggles at times, but he played decent for a rookie. I mean, obviously, Chris Lindstrom, he was out really for the whole year, but he played well at the end of the season. So they're expecting that right side of the offensive line to be like, that's the 2 guys. You got Jake, you still got Alex Mack. He's getting older, so he's getting a little thin so they might have to look at maybe getting guys for the future. Their biggest position up for grabs is left guard. They got to see who's going to be the new left guard next year. Obviously, the guys they signed in free agency did not play well. Jerome Brown and James Carpenter. They got to see what they're going to do there. Defensively, they let go of Vic Beasley, brought in Dante Fowler Jr. for a big deal. That's a guy they've liked for a while. Dan Quinn's liked him. They're bringing him in to replace Vic Beasley. Tack McKinley, hopefully he can be healthy this year. He showed potential in flashes, really hasn't produced in terms of stats. Obviously, I think Adrian Claiborne's still there. They have some guys, rotation. Obviously, Grady Jarrett, the most untalked about, underappreciated defensive tackle in the game. He's basically a miniature Aaron Donald. He's very good at what he does. Obviously, they have a great linebacker in Deion Jones. They just lost DeAndre Campbell, so they're going to have to replace him. I'm sure they're going to lose maybe some guys on the roster. Don't be surprised they draft a guy to try to replace him. Secondary, lost Tristan Dufront, but they have 2 guys they really like in Kendall Sheffield and Isaiah Oliver, and we'll see if they make any other additions from there. And obviously, safety-wise, they have Ricardo Allen. They're going to have to figure out what they're going to do with Keanu O'Neal. We don't know what he's going to look like coming back from his second season-ending injury. And they have KZ, who I'm interested to see where they're going to end up putting him at because he's a playmaker. But overall, I mean, they haven't made too many additions in free agency. They were tight against the cap. Again, they're one of those teams that have to use the draft as their way to improve their team. Which, I remember, first year under Dan Quinn, they did hit on all those draft picks. So it's not like they can't find guys. They got to hit on them this year. He needs these rookies to work for them, and he needs this team to maximize their potential, or he will be out of the job. Dan Quinn will be, and Thomas Dimitroff probably will be too. A lot of pressure, and it's not going to be easy. You still have the Saints with Drew Brees. They look like a complete offense. You got Tampa, who just got better with Tom Brady. The only team you can say maybe they're better than right now is Carolina. Now, if they can end up all being good, and then they make a wild card or something, that's great. But it's looking dim right now for Dan and against this division and everything. But we're going to have to see what happens with the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously, Falcon fans are going to be looking forward to see what their team comes up with this season. They've made some decent free agency acquisitions. We'll have to see what they do in the draft, and we'll have to see what everything ends up turning into when it gets down to it at the end of the day. So we'll have to see what happens with the Dirty Birds in Atlanta. But that's going to be all right here on the GSMC Football Podcast. I am your host, Brice Lewis. Thank you for tuning in and listening to another show. Don't forget to listen to all of our amazing shows on the GSMC Podcast Network. And don't forget to follow us on social media. Thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.